some of the changes are so big that almost anything is on the table, right? You're like, almost like major characters could be completely omitted. Like, we still haven't seen several major characters. Elias has not shown up in the show so far. Like, there are certain characters that are gone, and it's like, are they going to get introduced later? All the characters who we met in Camelin, like, almost all of them are not in the show so far. So, will we get them? I hope so.
Welcome, friends, to episode 212 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm James.
And I'm Luke.
And this week we discuss episodes 5 through 8 of Rafe Judkins' 2021 series, The Wheel of Time. Okay, and now back to your regularly scheduled Wheel of Time coverage. Yep. We took a week off, in a sense, not really, but we took a week to cover Green Knight because we really wanted to do a Christmas project, and it just lined up that we were sort of in the middle of our Wheel of Time coverage. But here we are to finish episodes 5 through 8 of this series.
Yeah, thanks for sticking with us. Glad to be back to Wheel of Time to finish it out right this year. We ended up deciding we didn't want to put it off till next year. We wanted to get this thing wrapped up. So our last looks episode we traditionally would be releasing right now will be pushed back a week, basically. But you can still look for that. Hopefully you still will enjoy us looking back at 2021, even if it is early 2022 at that point.
Yeah, I think there's a certain amount of still retrospective stuff the first couple days of the year.
Yeah. I like to think so. But here we are back in the world of Wheel of Time, especially in the show. And I wanted to ask you, James. So let me set the stage. We are in a time in this world where male Aes Sedai are allowed to join the White Tower. And me and you, a couple of novices, show up. Turns out we are quite strong in the one power. Congratulations.
Of course, yeah, as it should be.
As it should be. And we are studying, and when you are studying, what happens is you start getting the Ajas start sort of approaching you, especially if you're powerful, and they start saying like, hey, you should come join us. And you start to learn about the Ajas. And I know that that's something we're just starting to touch on. I sent you an article earlier breaking down all of the different ones. And I have come up with a couple that I think I would be most drawn to. And then I have one that I think I would actually end up joining. And I'm curious to know where you're leaning to. It's kind of like, other franchises have this kind of stuff. Harry Potter has their thing. So I thought it'd be fun to do that a little bit here with Wheel of Time.
Okay, so I withhold my right to turn this back later because honestly, we've only really, especially in the book, only really encountered blue, and then in the show they've only given us glimpses of a few others that are, seemingly important. But I don't really, I think the easiest way for you to understand each of the colors is to get to know a character who's in the color and sort of see the personality and the temperament and everything.
It definitely takes a while before that happens in the series, before you actually meet a memorable character from each Aja.
So personally for me right now, there's a few that, especially reading this article, that I would be drawn to, and then one that I would definitely most enjoy, and two of the three are some of the more important ones right now. And the two that I'm drawn to from the show and from the book so far are the blue and the green, and I'll pick one of those two.
Those are the two that I would have said would be your two top contenders. I was actually talking with my wife Annalisa about this earlier, and we were both talking about ours. And then I was like, "What do you think about James?" And we both said blue and green. Somewhere between those two would probably be it for you.
Right. And looking through this, we haven't met a brown Aja yet, but of course, that interests me as well because it's gathering and preserving knowledge is something that I find to be obviously important. But my temperament and me as a person, I can't tell really yet. I'm gonna go ahead and say green because I'm not. I think blue is a little more secretive than I think I'm more on where my emotions on my sleeve a little more than maybe blues do.
Yeah, they're more collecting knowledge and moving in not in the shadows, but they're strategic, and the greens are the ones who are more likely to be in the battles, on the front lines fighting the forces of the dark. So they tend to work together a lot with the blues. But yeah, that is kind of a distinction. But it's kind of tricky to differentiate between them, but that's my understanding. Blues are more interested in justice in the sense of what's right and wrong rather than the law. Whereas I think Gray was much more, they're like lawyers almost, and diplomats. Maybe quickly we should go over a few of them in case people don't know. So we also have White, which is like philosophy and rationale.
Logic,
They're also
yeah.
logic, yeah. They're also a little bit neutral, kind of like the Grays. The Grays and the White seem kind of similar to me, although Grays are much more about law, whereas Whites are much more about like big philosophy questions and ethics and stuff like that. And they're very much in their heads and kind of removed from the day-to-day world. Then you have Yellows, which are the sort of healing Ajah. I always thought of them as like magical doctors, in everything that could possibly entail. And then you got the Browns, who are like librarians. They are historians. They are interested in knowledge. They tend to read a lot. And kind of get lost in their books. They tend to not be out on the front lines as much because of that. They're much more like academics. And then you have the Red, which is all about controlling the use of the one power, especially misuse of the one power, and especially when that relates to men who might be out there misusing it. Then you have the Greens, who are on the front lines of battle, like I said. The Blues, we already talked about. And I think that's all of them, or have I missed somebody?
Yeah, I think you got them all.
Okay.
I was gonna start this by joking and saying I would be Red, just because like I don't know. I'm sure there are people who identify as Red. Eventually, they probably have like some very sympathetic red Ajah that eventually are introduced. But looking at this again, I'm looking at the Blue and the like righteousness and justice mixed with. I would be somewhere in between Blue and Green for sure.
Yeah, I feel like you'd be called to both, and it'd be a decision, right? You'd have to decide.
Which is interesting to think about for going forward in the story. I'm going to be interested to see characters that we know and love have to like maybe decide where they fall, even though they might not be perfectly in one or the other.
I'm not going to reveal anything, but you could be excited by what's going to come then. For me, it ended up coming down to two as well. Mine was the Blue and the Brown. And I ended up leaning towards Brown, I think, actually. As much as I want to think I'd be out there fighting the fight, I'm much more likely to have my nose in a book, I think, in the tower. Just the descriptions of the Brown and really kind of sounded like, yeah, that's probably more me. I would be potentially called the Blue, and I feel like I could be convinced if it felt like I was really needed at the time. But yeah, somewhere between those two, but I'm going to lean Brown. I think you're going to lean Green. So I think that's cool. That's going to be our podcast, a Brown and a Green.
Right, yeah. Interesting.
It's kind of like, what were we, Ravenclaw and Gryffindor.
Gryffindor.
Yeah, so There you go. All right. I don't know. I thought that was fun. Let us know what Ajahs you guys would be, you would join. And if you think that that's the right pick for us, or if you imagine we would actually be better suited in a different one, let us know. Always happy to hear that stuff.
So last we left this, we were
coming off the high of episode 4.
We were both talking a lot about how we felt about the show and what we were excited for going forward. Do you want to maybe say like where you were at going into this and how you felt?
I don't necessarily remember what I said, but I can tell you that when I was excited because the show had been getting better. It had been improving to me with every episode. So going into episode 5, very excited. And still just like having a great time with this show, and happy to say that I continue to have a great time with it. The show ends up being something that I'm very excited about going forward. Happy with overall. I have criticisms. There are things that I dislike. There are things that I like, and we will talk about them. But going into episode 5, super excited to see Tar Valon, which is something we're about to get into, and I pumped. What about you?
Right, yeah. I think I remember saying at the end of episode 4, I felt safe in the hands of the filmmakers. I feel like I was ready to, trust and think that they could pull off the things they needed to pull off, regardless of the changes and everything like that. And I'm happy to say, for the most part, I agree with you. Like, it's definitely not a perfect show, but it had a lot of what I was looking for out of the show, especially right now. And I am excited to see more. So, like, getting into this episode 5 here, I was, interested in what they would cut and what I would be getting, kind of spoiled for me from the book because I haven't read the book yet. So we get a lot of stuff that I hadn't.
There's a good bit in here, right?
experience yet. Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking about you a lot during this, going like, oh, that's going to be new. That's new information. That's new information. And there are things where it's like, oh, that's just a big change. And he won't know that that's not in the book. Some of that is there too.
Well, that's something I was almost actively trying to pick up on is like, I have to assume some of the times things are book accurate. And then I'm wondering when it's not. And if it, like how people who read the book would have responded to that. But just on my own experience, there were some things along the way that I don't know if they're changes or not, but it'll be interesting to see if I mean, regardless if there are changes in terms of the overall story, it's a change from the first book. So
yeah,
for me, those were changes.
There's always a quandary that I'm faced with in these situations where I have to decide, do I talk about, I guess on our show, that's what we do, right? So I'm going to talk about the ways in which things are different in the books. If you are really worried about the books being spoiled for you, I guess that could just be aware that I am going to talk about that a little bit. I won't go into like super detail, but if something massive has been changed, I'll mention, hey, in the book it's different.
Well, I mean, because the show's already kind of spoiled that for you from the book regardless. So you're going to think going into these books that does happen at some point anyway.
And yeah, I mean, so take that for what it will. We just read the book, so like that's our show. We're going to compare the two. So I'll be doing that throughout.
I was noticing just the rapid pace at which they were like stripping through the story at sometimes. And I found myself kind of not understanding fully like what the rush was. Like, why couldn't we slow down a little bit? And I know it's partially probably because they want to get to the juicy stuff that people are really, really invested in. Maybe they didn't believe in everything that happened in book one enough to like hold it together as a show that people would want to continue seeing. But I just felt like some of it, I was like, let's slow down. Like, there's so much book here. Like, really, like, take your time and live in this world. And it feels like some of the time they're trying to get through the book to get to certain parts.
I agree. And there is a lot of story here. I do think they can afford to slow down a little bit. I would love to see in a season 2 more like 10 episodes or even 12. I think would be better served to this material. I don't know if they'll get that. We'll see. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it felt like they were in a rush for some reason. And whenever they could take a moment to slow down, it was always a much needed and welcomed reprieve, actually, because it was like finally get to have these character moments that make us fall in love with these people.
Yeah, and I guess specifically what I'm talking about is they have so much material from the first book, and they're choosing to add a lot that wasn't in the first book into this season. And it's like, all right, if you're already strapped for time, why are you adding additional story to this degree?
So Rafe Judkins has talked about in one of the interviews I read that he really felt like he needed to do a lot for Perrin and Matt and Egwene and Nynaeve. Honestly, all of them were more underserved in the first book because it was much more Rand-centric. And they all develop more over time in subsequent books. And he felt like there's no time for that. He needs to like get that happening early in the show and have this ensemble cast all be hitting. And so I think that was the goal. I don't know that the result was necessarily great across the board. We'll talk about it throughout, but I think that was the idea. And that's why they felt rushed, is I think he wanted to really advance a lot of these plot lines. And you know, I do hope that because this thing is apparently a hit, which I'm very happy to see, has been doing well. I really hope that they can slow down a little bit in season 2.
Yeah, I mean, the viewership is there. The proof of concept has set in. They've shown that they can carry the show. They can do the things they need to do. Now up the budget and slow down the pacing. And I think that we're in for like a great show all the way through.
Totally agree.
All right, so I'm gonna jump into plot here. The episode 5 is called Blood Calls Blood. The Aes Sedai bury Corrine and Loghain's army. Lan, Moiraine, Nynaeve, and the Aes Sedai travel to the White Tower of Tar Valon for a month. Moiraine warns Nynaeve of the Aes Sedai's political machinations. The White Cloaks waylay Perrin, Egwene, and the Tinkers. With Aerim's help, Perrin and Egwene initially escape but are captured by Aemon Valda. Valda suspects Egwene can channel and tortures Perrin to force Egwene to channel. Egwene and Perrin escape when wolves attack the camp, seemingly connected to Perrin. Rand and Matt arrive at Tar Valon, where Rand is disturbed by Matt's odd behavior. Rand meets Loyal and Ogier, who notes that Rand resembles a foreign Aiel. Loyal helps Nynaeve reunite with Matt and Rand. Loghain is paraded around Tar Valon, laughing madly when he notices Rand and Matt watching. Lan and the other warders console Stepan, Kareen's warder. Moiraine and Alana discuss Stepan's mental state. Alana warns Moiraine of both Liandrin's motives and the impending return of the Amyrlin seat. The following morning, Lan finds Stepan dead by suicide. Lan serves as the primary mourner at Stepan's funeral, overcome with grief.
So I honestly, I want to hear your reactions to some of this stuff. Some of it's in the book, some of it's not. So yeah, I'm really curious to know what your thoughts are.
Well, the first thing was they're combining Caemlyn and Tar Valon.
Yeah. And honestly, I think it's a smart idea. I think it's a good idea. There are certain characters that get introduced in Caemlyn that are absent in this season. I have to assume they're going to introduce them next season. I think that's okay. I think getting Tar Valon introduced as a major player in the world politics in season 1 is a smart move. And a lot of the stuff that happens in Caemlyn, they move to Tar Valon instead. And honestly, this is one of those changes that I actually get behind. As much as it is different and book purists may be mad, I think it kind of solves a problem that we had with book 1. And that's they talked about going to Tar Valon an awful lot and never went there. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. So as a book reader who hasn't read on, I'm a little bit weary when these things happen because I don't know the ultimate outcome of some of these places. Is Caemlyn going to be a city that's just as important as some of these other major cities that we've learned, or is it just for adding some more culture, some more different locations and things like that? So I didn't know. I'm happy to hear that you think it's a good change.
I think it's a good change. I think we'll get Caemlyn soon. I think next season, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a location we're going to see. I feel like it was more important to introduce Tar Valon in season 1.
Because what I worry about is these little changes. It's because they have the advantage of having the entire story laid out in front of them, and they can decide to change things here and there. But I think that you have to do it expertly. I think you have to realize that these small changes create a ripple now that nearing the end of the series could be this tidal wave of changes and a mess.
And that's going to happen. And there are a lot of other changes that I think you're totally right. You're going to get that butterfly effect of, that was a small change we made here, but it's going to end up being massive. And we've seen a lot of that already, I think. I don't know. I think this one is okay. I think this one, they can just rearrange. They can introduce Caemlyn next season. And, they've already moved a lot of stuff with Logain. I think it's doable. There are going to be changes. And in fact, the longer the show goes on, the more different it might start to feel from the books. But some of that I think is going to happen when you're trying to adapt, 14 doorstopper novels into probably 6 to 8 seasons of television would be my guess. If we're lucky.
Right. Yeah, but overall, getting to see Tar Valon, even though I hadn't done it in the book yet, getting to see Tar Valon was awesome.
What did you think of it? Yeah, what did you think of the White Tower?
It's very impressive getting to see the Aes Sedai political vying and everything, because that's something that I've been really wanting to see. Because I'm pretty sure the only Aes Sedai for the most part that we see in the book is just Moiraine.
No, we see the Red who's in Caemlyn. Remember, she's and she makes that prophecy about Rand.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so those two, but realistically, not a lot. Getting to see them in their environment and starting to learn a little bit about how they come up in this area. They come to the tower, they're novices, and then they hone their powers, and getting to learn about the Aja and the way that those work, and getting to see Moraine's hierarchy within these people, and how I kind of would have assumed that she was the highest of the Blue Order, but it's not clear that that's the case.
Yeah, she's got an interesting reputation as someone who is sort of left and been out and about for a long time, and so some people are resentful of her for that. She's been keeping herself apart from Tower politics.
Definitely. It didn't seem like she was very close to the other Blues from the interactions that we had. She, close enough to where they were on the same team as her, but they were also telling her what to do. You're not supposed to leave the tower from here on. Let's just have you home for a while. The
design and concept of the White Tower, and the way every woman there has her own desires. I think that's even a line in the show where it's everybody here has their own aims, their own desires. They're all, potentially dangerous in their own way, and they have their own agendas. So I think that's perfect.
That's the stuff that I found to be the most interesting. And I do want to talk about the great look of the tower. Like some of those aerial shots that we're getting early on with like the women all dressed in their different colors. It's very striking on the white, and like just like it looks so cool, and it looks very regal. It looks very magical, and it doesn't like in some ways I think some of the areas look like reused sets and things like that. This one, very importantly, is awesome, and they spent their money here.
So let's talk about the warders, because that's like a big plot line in this episode in particular, is Stepan, who has lost his Aes Sedai in the last episode, and he's in mourning about it, and he's wearing white now, and we see he looks like he's kind of in a daze, and we see multiple scenes of Lan and him talking, and we learn a lot more about the bond between warders and their Aes Sedai, and there's even an important line where he says warders aren't supposed to outlive their Aes Sedai. And we get the sense that this is really hard on him. And then, of course, it leads to him actually committing suicide. Seems like he drugged Lan, or maybe just got him really drunk, one or the other, probably drugged him. And just enough to where he could like get out there and kill himself in front of the statue. And there was like a moment where they were talking about him maybe joining with this other Green who we've met, and joining up with these other guys we've met. So you do hear that like that can happen, right? Like the bond, they can be bonded to a new Aes Sedai, and sometimes that's a way that warders are able to move on. But I think this is a good way of showing something directly that we only hear about as like a story, or like someone just telling you how it is in the book for a while, and then eventually you actually see it play out. But for the longest time, it's just like information we get. So it's cool to like make it all happen here on the screen, so we can internalize how this bond is and the effect it has on the warders if their Aes Sedai it does die. It's like almost the end for them.
There is so much in this that I found to be really important to setting out like Aes Sedai, the warders, and like their connection, like you're talking about. And like a couple of the things are like, for example, he takes her ring and has to drop it into that like vat where it joins that the rest of the metal, which probably will one day become other Aes Sedai rings and things like that. And the importance of the rings, like I think eventually Egwene brings back like a bunch of them.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal, obviously, from the White Cloaks, because
she grabs them at the end here when they're breaking free. She like grabs
right.
all the ones that this Valda character has.
So,
yeah.
And then eventually we see a character who has the ring but no stone or something like that. So
empty
she wasn't
ring.
powerful enough. So just the idea of the rings and the way that he ceremoniously like puts it back in, it rejoins in a ring, of course, in sort of a wheel, as everything's like cyclical in this. And then, then his eventual death, which was very sad. I was really looking forward to him to hope like rebonding and having another like second life as a warder. And it would have been cool to see him with the other two. They were clearly awesome characters. And then he kills himself, and I wanted to talk specifically about the warders like and the Aes Sedai all mourning together, and the way that like they like give. I thought at first that it was going to be sort of like a ceremonial, like give you the grief and you sort of like mourn for us, but it seemed like literally they were able to like give their grief to Lan, who then like had to deal with everyone's grief all at once in this moment to like sort of flush it from all their systems.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know that there's a direct book correlation to this scene. There may be. This is one of the problems of having read these books so long ago. But to me, I think this may have been something that they sort of invented for the show, and I really liked it. And in particular, whether or not it's Lan's grief that he's like allowing himself to actually express and it's sort of built up, or if he is sort of actually expressing all of their grief. There is a line about that, I think, something about that, but I took it to be more like I didn't think there was something magical going on. I didn't think they're actually like pushing their emotion into him. I think it was more like, you are going to be the one who ceremoniously gets to sort of embody our grief. And one of the things I absolutely loved about that scene was the look on Moiraine's face while it's happening.
She's also experiencing it.
Not only is she also experiencing it, but I think she is surprised by it. And I think that was what I loved about her performance. Is not only am I overwhelmed looking at you, looking at you, Lan, as you are experiencing this grief, and that emotion is so strong that it's hitting me too because of their bond. but also there was a look of kind of like shock. Like I didn't know that you had this depth of feeling in this moment. At least that's how I interpreted it. And I thought that was like a nice complexity to the performance. And by the way, Rosamund Pike, over these next few episodes, honestly, in the White Tower, has completely won me over as Moiraine. I have any hesitancy I had in like the early episodes is gone. I think she's killing it now and she is bringing something to this role that I'm really excited about. There's a real complexity here. There's a real depth of emotion. And yeah, especially at the tower itself, I think she's doing some of her best work, and I really, really liked it. And on the flip of that, another character that I also was a little bit hesitant about was Lan, who I also think kills it in these episodes we're about to cover. And any misgivings I had about Lan, not only has the performance made me feel better about them, but the show has demonstrated to me that they understand the character enough and what the character means to the story, and made him important enough. I was worried he was going to get relegated as more of a side character. Instead, he feels like one of the primary characters we're following. And I love that, and I think that that's appropriate for him.
Yeah, those two, I think, are really carrying the show. Like, I think there are some other good performances, and I think some other performances that are not amazing. But those two are like, they're really carrying the show, in my opinion. But to speak about the show understanding a character, or maybe not understanding a character, let's move to Perrin and Egwene and their situation. And how are you feeling, at least in this episode where we get Perrin being tortured and Egwene being forced to channel?
There's a kind of an odd, like, it's just a different scene than what happens in the book, but they're kept in the same room, and we get this Valda character questioning them, and he gives them this choice about how she's going to have to channel, or he's going to die. Or if she channels, then she'll die, and he'll let Perrin live. So it's like this impossible decision they're supposed to make. And then he starts like cutting into Perrin. And this is the first time we see Perrin's eyes go kind of golden in the show, which is in the book. And I was, I'm like, okay, this is an interesting way to go about this. He's kind of like, it's like poking the wolf with a stick. So I'm like, okay, at some point here, he's gonna sort of unleash the beast within. He's expecting Egwene to be the potential threat, but then I think Perrin is actually going to be the surprise because he's not expecting this from this man. And they kind of went that way. Perrin does end up accidentally, it seems, summoning a bunch of wolves to attack the camp, which is cool. And is something pretty much out of the book. However, it felt to me like Perrin didn't really get to do much here, other than he sort of menaces and looms over Valda. And then I guess this is because they're trying to show Perrin as like trying not to be violent.
I mean, they've very quickly more quickly than I would have thought, gone into the Way of the Leaf stuff.
He's like really trying to follow the Way of the Leaf, it seems like. And because of that, it doesn't feel like Perrin has gotten a chance to show how cool and like badass this character can be. And when he's in protective mode, I think that's one of the strongest things for Perrin. And we don't get to see that here. So ultimately, I was a little underwhelmed from Perrin's perspective here. I do think Egwene's stuff is mostly strong. I like seeing her learn to channel in her own way and stand up against these kind of villains.
So this scene in the book was Lan coming to save the day.
Yeah.
And obviously they wanted to set it up as Batman, like we talked about.
Right.
He's sort of Batmaning in and out.
Yeah, Lan and Nynaeve, yeah.
And so they wanted to change it to these characters saving themselves, which I think is a good change. I think that's cool.
Sure.
Like you said, Perrin like kind of seemingly scared the guy because he was menacing, and then that's when Egwene was able to get him with a knife. But it didn't feel like a super satisfying save. It didn't feel super satisfying for either character. I mean, I thought it was cool that Egwene was like sort of using like she like shot a fireball and then also like helped him Perrin get released, it seemed like.
Yeah, she like burned his wrist ropes, yeah.
Showing obviously that she's smart and she can handle a situation like that. And then they sort of run away, and I don't think that they've really, especially with Perrin, I don't think that they've made the power even close to as cool as I thought it was in the book so far. It just doesn't it doesn't connect the same. Sometimes he'll like stare at a wolf and he'll be like, this wolf it's not gonna hurt us, it's here to help us. And I don't know, I kind of want more from that long term, so that I really hope that they're starting from humble beginnings with that and it becomes a lot cooler as time goes on.
I have a lot of thoughts about Perrin, which I'll continue to touch on as we go. I do think a lot of this comes back to that original decision to have him kill his wife. And how
and it's addressed here, right? This is like he's tied up, and this is when he tells Egwene, and it's not touched on again. I don't think the rest of the season, and that's not satisfying enough to have been set up early on, and for this to be the payoff, I don't see it.
We talked about in our last book episode, Brandon Sanderson has come out and said he advised against having the Layla being murdered by or killed by Perrin in the first episode. He said, if you really want to do this sort of thing, have it be his master Lewin, who would be like the blacksmith that he worked for in the books. Have it be him instead, and you could do a lot of the same stuff without the all the problems that come with having it be his wife. And I just tend to agree with him, and I think that initial misstep is unfortunately carried throughout the season, and Perrin continues to be the character that I think they've gotten the most wrong, and I think they have the most work going forward to sort of win me back on. Because as we've talked about before, Perrin is maybe my favorite character in the books, and he's maybe my least favorite character in the show, which is a real shame.
Well, and like you said, it just having him even have a wife, even if she didn't die or whatever, changes a lot of things. That the tension between Egwene and him, which is addressed later, like there's a lot of things that makes it more fucked up. And like as a character, I don't believe that Perrin would have a wife and be yearning for Egwene even in the back of his mind, and like that kind of stuff continues to.
All right, so you've opened a big door here, so let's talk about that. That happens in a later episode, but since you mentioned it, yes, it is later revealed that Perrin has been yearning for Egwene, and I hate that change.
And they kind of talk. There's a little bit of that potentially in the first book, where you're like, there might be tension between.
There's some sort of protectiveness going on, and you can kind of read it certain ways. But I have always taken their relationship in the books to be much more of like a brother and sister who grew up together, and he has always been protective of her, but in the way a brother is protective of a sister. And they ultimately have a platonic relationship that I think is, that's the kind of thing I want to see more of in fiction, honestly. And I want to see more men and women just being platonic friends in our fiction. I think that's important to show, and I think this is a great example of that in the book. And unfortunately, they've instead tried to create sort of a love triangle with him and Rand, and I don't think it's going anywhere. And I think they're gonna sort of walk it back and say that he's over it now or something. But it's still just frustrating to me because it colors their relationship in a way that it just feels very different than the more wholesome sort of one that is in the book.
All right, well, let's talk more about Rand and Mat and their trip to Tar Valon. They've now made it to Tar Valon, and they're seeing the dragon, and then Rand meets Loyal. What did you think about Loyal?
Yeah, I was going to ask you too, the same question. Loyal's so I actually kind of like the look of him. He's not like over the top in the prosthetics. Like, he's definitely bigger than the average person. But he still looks very humanoid, and I think that works for the show. I mostly like the sort of performance by Loyal. I think he was good. I do think it felt like the character didn't have as much to do in the show, but yeah, mostly good. And then he ends up becoming important when they go to the waves later. So, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I wasn't particularly like wowed by the way they made the builder, the Ogier look. But I thought it was fine.
Yeah. So my initial first time I saw him, was like, oh boy, this is gonna be rough.
You didn't like it?
And then, it grew on me pretty quickly.
Okay.
And I actually I'm happy to say now, I like the design. I'd be super, even going forward, when they get close to him, when he's interacting with other human characters, like he looks good enough to where I like it. And like you said, he just didn't. He was less important. less eccentric, maybe a little bit. Like he had a little more to him, and I was expecting like much bigger. Like you said, I was expecting him to be like 2 men.
Instead, he was like 25% bigger. Like a little bit bigger than everybody else. Yeah,
he was just like a big person.
Yeah.
And but overall happy with no real complaints other than the fact that like, especially in this first episode that we meet him. But the only thing I would say is like I would love to have seen him do more, and then the last episode is something we'll get to eventually.
Yeah.
So episode 6 is called The Flame of Tar Valon. Siuan Sanchi, the Armelin seat, questions Liandrin for Loghain's gentling and Moiraine's traveling for 20 years. Visiting Rand and Mat, Moiraine detaches Mat from the tainted dagger from Shadar Logoth. Moiraine has also found Egwene and Perrin. Megan, a blue sitter, orders Moiraine to remain at the tower, and Moiraine tries to hide her motives from Liandrin. Moiraine asks Loial a favor. Moiraine and Siuan meet in secret, and the two lovers discuss their plan to find the Dragon Reborn. Moiraine takes a reunited Nynaeve and Egwene to meet the Amyrlin, where Egwene is awestruck and Nynaeve is suspicious. In the hall of the tower, Moiraine is exiled by Siuan in a ruse to allow her to leave the tower with the Two Rivers villagers. Moiraine gathers the Two Rivers villagers and Loial at a waygate, where they will travel to the Eye of the World to confront the Dark One and uncover who the Dragon Reborn is. Mat hesitates, and the other villagers, Loial, Moiraine, and Lan, enter the ways without him.
Okay, there's something I got to mention here because I told my wife I'd say it for her. She noticed that all of the Aes Sedai wear hoop earrings. That could be a reference to the wheel and to the circular nature and all this stuff. Because apparently that's like,
yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of cool little like costuming things going on here. And in particular, I think Moiraine, the dress she's wearing, this blue dress, this like more formal looking dress, it has some shoulder pads to it, very striking. And when especially when she ends up later on getting this judgment passed down, we even see her with her this blue headband looking thing. I don't know what you call that. It's some pendant like thing that hangs on your forehead. And that is a very important piece of costuming in the books. Like she's wearing that quite frequently. We haven't seen it as much in the show, but I thought here it was really cool to see her in like full Moiraine attire. And I thought this was like the most like spot on. She looks like she was described in the books here.
At the end of the first book, we get Moiraine like holding a pendant, and she's using it to like eavesdrop and listen in. Is that what that's supposed to be on her forehead, or is that something different?
At the end of the first book?
At the end of the first book, she's like listening in on Egwene and Rand talking. And she has like a comment about like, oh, the dragon is reborn, and that's how the book ends.
Maybe.
And she was using something to like eavesdrop.
I can't remember if it was that or not. I know she has said in the past that it's just like a tool to focus her power. It doesn't actually like do anything. She just uses it as a tool to like focus, which there are several of those kinds of things. She says that about her staff too, I think at one point. So it doesn't have any magic in it, I don't think. Although we do occasionally see items that do have a sort of amplification power, and we see one of those later on in the show. But let's back up a little bit because a lot of really interesting stuff here. This episode actually starts out with this opening of this little girl on the river, and she's with her father, and they're going fishing, and we learn that she can actually channel, and then we see her home has been like burned down, and then she's leaving for Tar Valon and saying goodbye to her father. And then we realize later that this is Siuan. It's just like a flashback to her as like a young girl on the river. What did you think of Siuan, the current Amyrlin seat here that we meet?
Super intimidating. And I thought that one thing that I definitely want to talk about is fake outs in this show. And this like switch that goes on that we'll talk about here in a little bit, but is really well done because I didn't see it coming. She was intimidating, and I thought like, I was like, oh shit, Moiraine's like up to her eyeballs in like potentially like political vying, and then also like this not the seat of power that I thought she might be within the Tar.
Yeah. Well,
within
and
the,
Liandrin, this Red is like scheming and trying to like basically tattle on her, and we get the implication that the Amyrlin is not supposed to have any ties or any favorites, any bias. So because of that, she has to be equal in her condemnation.
And I believed it. And then also Leandrin and some other people were talking about how like her grip is slipping. The Amerlin's seat is like slipping a little bit. She's losing her power. People are not following her as much as they used to. And I was like, oh shit, like she's going to think that Moiraine's coming for the seat. And they use that really well to disguise something that we'll get to. But I was talking about fake outs. And the show's interesting, and what I mean by fake out is like something that book readers would be expecting to happen, versus the thing that they might still have happen just in a different way, or they might not have happen. And then the way that they set these up, it keeps being like really surprising. But then there are times that like, so like for example, the stuff with Matt, like when Moiraine pulls the darkness from Matt, it like goes across her face and it's like on her face. And then like she eventually like gets it off her face and like sends it to wherever, just like gets rid of it.
Back into the dagger, I guess.
Back into the dagger, that's what it was. But I thought for a second that she was going to like consume this darkness, and it was going to be a total change from the book, and she was going to have to like contend with and like that didn't end up happening. But these fake outs that just keep book readers guessing are nice, but at the same time, some of the time the thing doesn't happen that we want to happen. And so it's like, I don't know. It's to varying degrees of success, I would say, with each one. But the stuff that we end up getting between Moiraine and Siuan, very unexpected, but I actually ended up loving it. Like this, she keeps looking at this door, and I was like, is this going to be the Ways? Are they changing it so the Ways is in Tar Valon? And I really wasn't going to like that. And then ultimately she like goes through it, and it seems like kind of portal-like, and I was like, this could be the Ways. And then she gets through it, and then she's waiting, and then there's this familiarity between the two characters. And I don't know if this is book accurate, if we get this eventually, but this stuff was awesome. Like this, the way that they were talking, and we were getting like the deeper motives of both characters and sort of what Moiraine's overall plan is and why she's been doing the things she's been doing. And then also we get to see her like vulnerable and like with someone she loves. And I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah. So I have some book knowledge, which I can share. I don't know how to approach it, really. I guess if you really don't want to hear, because this goes into some stuff that happens later, right? Like we haven't gotten there in the books yet. So if you really don't want to hear it, I skip ahead a couple minutes. But to me, this goes somewhere that Robert Jordan wasn't quite willing to go, and I'm very glad they did. My memory of it is it was sort of hinted at that maybe they had a relationship that went beyond a close friendship. But instead, in the books, I think it's much more that they're like, they came up together as novices, and they were extremely close friends. And Robert Jordan sort of hints, maybe there was something more, or some people maybe thought that there was something more. But in the show, they made it explicit. And I think that's better. You know, honestly, I think that's more interesting. I think it gives more depth to their relationship overall. And you know, this is the kind of relationships we should be seeing more of on television, right? So I totally approve of it, loved it, and yeah, I like the way it was shown here. And it was one of those things that, like you're saying, they keep putting us book readers on our toes, because we also there is kind of this misdirection that goes on, but not quite in this way. And so when we're seeing Siuan like lay into her, as a book reader, you're like, well, are they going with that route where this isn't real, or are they going to lean into it and say that she actually is? Because they've changed so much, it's really hard to guess sometimes. But sometimes that's cool, and it keeps you on your toes. And again, I was really happy when it was like, okay, they revealed that they are still not only really close friends, but also lovers in the show. I think it really works. Her
eventual like exile that we'll get to a little bit. I think it's here at the end. Yeah, it is in this episode. So she eventually gets exiled. And it makes that like so impactful, right? Like she's basically saying, and I was very careful to notice the wording, right? So she's saying that until Siuan recalls her to the tower, she won't be coming back. And I'm like, fuck, if she like dies or is unseated or something like that, no longer has the power to call her back, then she might not be able to come back to the tower ever. And not to mention just that, on top of the fact that she's not going to see her lover. And they mentioned how like it's been so long, and how they spend so much time apart, but they always knew that it was going to be that way. It's just tragic.
And like Amarillans aren't supposed to like have lovers, I think, and so there's a lot of that in this series where it's like the wisdom isn't supposed to marry, and the Amarillan's not supposed to marry, and all this stuff, you know. warders aren't supposed to marry. I don't know. They can marry their own Aes Sedai, I guess, but it seems like not a lot of them are married to like other women because it would be it's a very difficult thing, I think, to maintain if you're married to someone else but bonded to someone else, you know?
I loved when Nynaeve and Egwene ended up coming to talk to Siuan, and the way that like they like obviously like Egwene is so excited, she wants to be an Aes Sedai and everything like that, and then Nynaeve continues to just be like bad, like just like not taking shit from Emily, but she's like, I don't care who you are. I'm
a wisdom from Two Rivers, so I'm gonna talk to anybody and everybody this way. Yeah.
I honestly think by the end of this, in the show, I think Nynaeve is easily one of my favorite characters, if not my favorite character.
Yeah. No, and honestly, the performance is great. Absolutely killing it. I also like what they're doing with Nynaeve in the show. That sort of stubbornness and just like willingness to say anything to anybody is totally right out of the book too. So and
you see that. Like Leandrin is afraid of the Armelin Sea. Yep. You know what I mean? Like she's like not willing to fuck around. And
it's kind of like Nynaeve doesn't know enough to know. You know what I mean? Like she's too ignorant of sort of the thing, and she doesn't care enough to learn. You know, so it'll be interesting to track that. But
Leandrin also, the other thing I wanted to note was how Moiraine fucking owned Leandrin here. Because Leandrin's like talking about how she's gonna, you know, I forget exactly what she was threatening her with, but just like the fact that she was hiding Nynaeve and all this other stuff. And then Moiraine is basically like, I know the guy that you go to sleep with on like the regular, so shut up or I'm gonna tell everybody. And the Red Aja will not be okay with that. And she puts her in her place, and I was like, hell yeah, of course she would have dirt on her. She would have secrets because that's what the Blues are for.
Yeah, I was frustrated early on when Leandrin was like walking all over Moiraine and like saying all this shit, and Moiraine wouldn't say anything. And I was like, why isn't she saying anything? Moiraine should be able to like totally trade, you know, verbal sparring with this woman. And then I was like, maybe they're saving it. And then sure enough, we get this scene, and I was like, okay, so they're saving it for here. It's that TV thing where you like build up this lack of something, and then when you get it, it feels like, oh, okay, you kind of close the circle there. I think we were really waiting for this scene for Moiraine to put her in her place, and she does, and epically so. So she also, we see this healing scene, like you said, and Matt is finally restored somewhat to his normal self. Unclear. So the dagger, she like, I don't know if she leaves it on the floor. Or like, because I kept wondering, I'm like, where did the dagger go? Did Lan pick it up?
Yeah, he picked it up with like a blanket. Remember, he like threw a blanket over there, and it seemed like he picked it
up.
But
later on, Padan Fain has it.
Right.
So
I don't get that, obviously.
How did he get it? I don't know. I don't think the show shows us. I feel like there's some plot holes kind of going on here at the end. I was a little frustrated by, and particularly surrounding this dagger. I'm like, I don't know what happens to it. Anyway, it seems like it's an important item that you should keep track of. But yeah, I mean, this was mostly cool. Definitely liked the healing scene, and it is funny. And I remember feeling this way in the books too, of like how distrustful everyone is of Moiraine, and yet we kind of know that she is a good person who has their best interest in mind. It's interesting to see how much Nynaeve and you know is like, I don't trust you, and I still don't trust you, and you know Rand is like, I still don't trust you, and it's like, oh come on guys. This may be my favorite episode from this chunk, these four. Really liked this one, and in particular, the final scene where she gets exiled, I think is some of the best Rosamund Pike, Moiraine acting of the entire series. When she is asked specifically for Siuan to do this and requested, like, you're going to have to exile me. That's what's going to have to happen. And yet, when it happens, you can tell it hurts. And the thing where everybody turns their back on her, and then she has to walk out, and she's like barely keeping it together, and then she walks out, and even her friends that, you know, the couple of Aes Sedai we've seen her be friendly with, turn their backs on her.
And like, it's Lan is like, I can be in the hall with you if you want me to be, and she's like putting on a strong face, and she's like, no, I don't need you to, it's fine, like we've all planned for this. But the actual moment that it happens, it's a lot more impactful. You know, it's like it's got a lot of weight to it, because like I said, she might never come back. And I think she killed it in this scene. This was the moment I was like, any doubts I had about her as Moiraine are gone. So you said this past one was potentially your favorite episode. I think this next one is my favorite episode.
I think this next one and the previous one are the two that I have to think more about before I could decide which one's actually my favorite.
Right. Yeah. Then the last one had some great scenes to it. 7, for some reason, I was sucked into the whole time, and 7 is called The Dark Along the Ways. The Two Rivers villagers who followed Moiraine into the ways argue about returning for Mat, but continue forward. Loyal guides them along the ways which has been corrupted. The group encounters a Trolloc. Egwene repels the Trolloc, but the One Power attracts Machen Shin, Black Wind, which provokes their deepest fears. Nynaeve repels Machen Shin with the power, while Moiraine opens the waygate to Faldara. A man along the ways follows them to Faldara. Once there, they argue with Moiraine, who reveals whoever is not the dragon would die if they reached the Eye of the World. Moiraine visits the seer Min Farshaw. Nynaeve and Lan, the heir to the lost kingdom of Malkir, have sex. Egwene and Rand reconcile. Rand recalls that Tam was present at the Battle of the Shining Walls and encountered a pregnant maiden of the spear who died giving birth to Rand, whom Tam raised. Machen Shin taunted Rand, telling him he is the dragon. Rand had channeled to escape both an earlier dark friend and the Trolloc in the ways. Rand and Moiraine leave Faldara to go to the Eye of the World, leaving the rest behind.
Yeah. All right. So let's talk about that opening, huh?
Yeah, pretty crazy. First of all, just getting into the ways. I was excited that the ways looked pretty cool. I was really happy with how the ways looked.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I also think they looked great. I like the lightning that would occasionally light up the larger space, so you could kind of see the scope of where they were at. It's a very hard thing from the books. I was like, I don't know how they're going to capture this, because it's a very sort of surreal place. And I actually think they kind of nail it here. I think it looks great. But I actually was talking about before that, we get this cold open, and it's this ale woman, pregnant, fighting multiple dudes on the side of this mountain in the snow. And for my money, this is the best action sequence in the entire show so far. It was the best choreography. It was the coolest.
Great camera work that like really showed a lot of like kinetic motions, but also like great angles that were like showing off like this person's like combat skills are clearly like ridiculous.
And she's pregnant and she's just like fucking killing all these guys in full armor. It's so cool. And
I know we'll eventually get it, but like I'm sure that they're just like a people of warriors, and they even have their pregnant women go out and fight. But like a pregnant woman being on the battlefield doesn't seem like a great idea in general. Just because like it's like for the health of the baby, at least, you know, like I don't know.
I think there is precedent for this in the book, which you get to eventually. So I think these women are called like spear maidens or something like that, and I think there is some precedent for them fighting while pregnant. I'm not sure what the exact details of that are, but I think that is something from the book. And you know, clearly this is Rand's mother here, right? Like we learn. We don't know immediately, but like if you've read the books, you know.
Right.
And you see that hair and blade.
I was thinking about that too. Like I wonder if like just show watchers picked up on that. It's pretty clear. Like by the end of the scene, it cuts to him in a similar kind of like it's like going from him, and it's like, and the baby was very important, and cuts to him.
Yeah. I think at the end of the episode, they make it clear, right? Because they show Tam is the one who's there, yeah.
I was happy, too, that, like, this is the Tam sort of hallucination that I loved in the book that we didn't get, but we're just getting it as sort of, like, a vision scene from Min / also, like, Rand remembering something or whatever.
Yeah, Min sees Rand holding a baby, and I guess that was a premonition of what happens in the next episode, is my guess. Because I was a little bit unclear on that one. I don't think it was a throwback to this one, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe that baby is himself. Not sure. But anyway, and then we get the entrance into the ways in which Matt does not go through. And we get our first of many big changes we're going to get with this whole Eye of the World plot line. And that's that Matt doesn't even go along in the show. He stays behind.
I was pissed, like legit pissed. Yeah. I was like, why?
Well, and what also sucks is this is like the last we really see of him. Like we get a brief glimpse of him in the next episode, but like Matt doesn't get to do anything else in this season, really.
I don't get it. I really don't get it. Why? And like because I don't have the knowledge of the next few books or whatever. Maybe they're setting him up to do something that he does later. But I had the sense in the books, at least, that he had like sort of shaken this darkness, and he was gonna. But the last glimpse we see of hhim, he's like pretty clearly like still fucked up from whatever evil shit's going on.
I think, and I don't want to spoil anything in the book or the show, but I'll just say that I think they're accelerating his journey with the darkness from Shadar Lorgoth, and they're trying. I think it will all be addressed next season, and in order to get him in position for that to happen, I think they decided to have him kind of split from the party here. And then he can kind of do his own thing. That's my guess. It is unfortunate that he will be recast. We've talked about that. Seems like the guy is not returning. So I don't know if I'm wondering if they'll find a way to address that in show, or if they're just going to like not say anything and recast him. I don't know. I'll be curious to see what they do.
Maybe the darkness touches him and it changes his appearance or something.
Yeah,
but
maybe you can find it in universe way.
I'm wondering if there was some sort of dispute or something and he was like cut out of the last couple episodes
I don't
because
know.
they were like...
It does seem weird. I don't know. I haven't read that. I don't know if they've made it public, if so. But anyway, the rest of them go through the ways, and it's interesting that it says Egwene is the one who hits the Trolloc with the one power, but I think it's later revealed that it was Rand, right?
Yeah, it is, but that was a good fake out again.
Fake out, yeah.
I didn't get that. I definitely, the first time through, I did not catch it. I just assumed Egwene did that.
Yeah, it looked like it came from her. She looked surprised when it happened, and then it kind of recontextualizes later that maybe she was surprised because she didn't actually do it.
Well, I think she's convinced that she also did it. She says, like, I didn't mean to channel there, and I think it's just, like, he, like, grabbed her, and they both, it looked like it could have been either of them, but I in the first place, you didn't really, I don't know, I didn't think anything of it. Yeah, and then Nynaeve uses her, like, sphere of protection again, that she, like gets rid of the... Machin Shin is, like, really closing in on them, and they're all hearing the voices, and then she blasts it back for a second.
And this is the first reveal in the show of Perrin's secret affection or romantic attraction for Egwene. And my initial reaction was I viscerally disliked it, which we've already touched on a little bit. My wife, also not a fan. We've just talked about how, like, it feels like Perrin has been mangled in the show. Like this, they've made some big choices with this character that has set him back, in my opinion, and made him less interesting, given him less to do. And unfortunately, I think the actor portraying him has been saddled with all of this difficulty in the writing that he's trying to overcome, and he doesn't get a lot of moments to, like, win us over. Like, if you think about Perrin in this season, it's a lot of moping. It's a lot of, like, looking confused and looking sad and looking conflicted, and not a lot of him doing anything particularly interesting or cool. And that's frustrating.
Right, which is a bummer because the whole point that he was trying to address, that Rafe Judkins was trying to address, is he wanted to give these characters more layers and things to do early on and build up their characters. And I think the opposite happened here. Like, I feel like we still don't know that much about Perrin, and instead he's in the wrong direction.
You know what Perrin should have been a lot more like, in my opinion? Now, he's a very, very different character, but a little bit like Amos from The Expanse, in that he can start out as just kind of a soft-spoken but kind of dangerous powerhouse, and then over time become a fan favorite. And I think Perrin has the potential to do that. And unfortunately, I don't know if they can recover from how many missteps they've taken with this character in this first season, which is a real shame because, again, love that character in the books.
It's a bummer. I think that there's still plenty of time. I think that Jeff Bezos hopefully is committed to giving us more Wheel of Time.
Let's not give Bezos any more credit than he needs, okay?
Right. Okay, his wallet, his company has committed to making more. And I mean, the fact that this show was already underway before the second season was underway before the first was out shows that they're going to continue come hell or high water. So I think that hopefully that they hear the reactions from the fans and they can sort of, redo some things here and there and change.
It's a big mess. It's going to take some cleaning up, but it's not impossible. I hope that they do it. I wanted to ask you, okay, so now we get Algomar, we get Faldara, and we get Min. But I want to start off with Faldara, the entrance into Faldara, because that was a really memorable sequence in the book that we definitely talked about. And the way that Lan was addressed by the people, and this we hear about Daishan. And how did you think that the show approached it by comparison? What did you think of it?
I wish that when they first rolled up to see any soldiers, I wish they would have done the thing that happened in the book, which is immediate, like, love for this character. They showed respect, but I would have liked to have seen, like, the whole, like, are you going to raise the banners? Yeah. Like, are you here to change the world? And he sort of was just like, they respected him, bowed to him, and he smiled. And then I thought for a second that they were going to do away with Lan's backstory, and I was going to fucking lose it. I was like, there's no way that you can get away with not having Lan's story like fleshed out in this.
Talking about fake outs, I thought they were going to completely change it for a minute there.
Yeah, and then they had this family who I thought potentially was going to be his family or something, and they had escaped, and I was like, holy shit, they totally fucked it. And again, this is one of those fake outs for book readers. Yeah. Where I think they pulled it off, and like I don't know that the reasoning was great, but like ultimately knowing that those were the
basically his adoptive family that took
and one of his father's soldiers who helped him escape, one of the 5 that made it eventually back to actually deliver him. Happy that the story eventually comes out. I think he's more gives it to Nynaeve later as context because she like comes to dinner and then they have sex or. Maybe before they have sex, whatever. Yeah. Which is another huge leap.
Yeah. They're speeding some of this stuff up, for sure.
Yeah. A lot of the romantic stuff has been played up a lot and accelerated.
Robert Jordan is a very fade to black, which I guess they mostly do here too. But mostly, he wasn't very interested in getting into the bedroom. Let's just say that about Robert Jordan. He would allude to stuff sometimes, and every now and then you'd get a little bit of a borderline sex scene, but nothing too risque happens in these books. So I think they're trying to push the envelope a little bit with the show here. Not that this was a particularly risque scene, but like I don't know, they're trying to up the sort of heat level. You know what I mean in the show.
Well, and like we didn't even talk about it, but there was nudity before, which I thought like, and it's more casual nudity. It's not like sexualized.
Yeah, like in the bathhouse, there's some people naked, right? Yeah,
which is fine. It's good to have nudity. People are naked, and it's just the natural bodies. There's no reason to have any sort of like shame or be weird about.
Well,
that
and it's
kind of
again
stuff.
Them trying to, I think, raise the level of the age, whatever in the show. Like they want this to be an adult show. Maybe not on par with Game of Thrones, but like as far as like explicitness, but like it's a show for adults, and they're wanting to make that clear. And I think that's a smart thing to do because as the show continues to progress, you want the audience to be there who are adults. Ultimately, it can appeal to teens, and I'm sure it does. I'm sure there are a lot of teens who are watching this, but your primary audience it should be adults, I think. What about Algomar? So it was kind of interesting portrayal of Algomar, right? Like he seems a lot more hot-headed and sort of strong-willed, but like pretty similar, I guess, to the character in the book. There's some changes in how things play out with this whole fighting at the Gap, which we'll get into next episode more. We also meet his sister, Amalisa, who is the one, like you were saying, who doesn't have the stone in the ring, and apparently she came and like studied at the tower, but wasn't able to achieve the shawl. And instead has this empty ring as some sort of sign that she has been trained somewhat, but isn't actually an Aes Sedai. So I don't know. That was a character we didn't touch on at all in the book, I think.
And again, I don't know if this is a book character that eventually shows up, but cool to introduce another layer to this family, and ultimately the stuff that happens with her is fairly interesting. I thought it was cool to have like a character that could basically was like sensitive to the source but couldn't wield it and isn't like as gifted or whatever, because you kind of need that when everybody in the show so far that can touch the source has been ridiculously overpowered. You do need some people who are more like ground level, like can touch it but don't like end up pursuing it or don't end up like strong enough or something like that, so you can see the levels of it.
It's like, oh, you're also the strongest in 1,000 years and you're strongest in 1,000 years, and you don't want that. There are a lot of different various power levels. Not everybody's making the reader bust off your eye over 9,000. Sorry, Dragon Ball Z exactly. Reference there. Okay, so but yeah, now very like I don't think it's a huge spoiler to say Min is an important character, and we get Min here. And I have to be really careful about the ways in which I talk about Min, because in the book, she has only been introduced briefly and she hasn't done a whole lot. We get her introduced here. She does some reading. I feel like we get a little more Min here. And I'm just curious to know what your thoughts are on this character and that you've seen them on screen and you've seen her on screen, and like, what do you think of her?
Yeah, different personality than I was expecting. I thought she was going to be more mysterious in like a cloak over your face, kind of like giving, like that kind of prophecy giver, like being a bartender and being like more approachable seemingly as a seer is interesting. So seeing something in film or on a TV show versus getting the interpretation of what you're seeing in your mind's eye when you're reading something. They were careful to not show some things, but like seeing these things with like Perrin has the gold eyes, he's like covered in blood. Rand has a baby, and it's like, you know, they're giving us what they think that won't spoil, but it felt very much like, of course all these things are going to happen. Min has said as much. And
most of them happen immediately. Like even she sees Nynaeve like have the like burned eyes and stuff, and that happens in the next episode. I think the baby happens in the next episode. So we don't get a lot of like far future predictions here, which we actually get a lot of those in the book. She rattles off a bunch that she sees, and I was interested to see they really scaled that back in the show.
They're realizing that they can't, or else people are going to put all the puzzle pieces together right away.
Yeah, maybe.
In a show, I think it's like you're showing things that like if you it's kind of hard to give like an interpretive version of things, or I don't know. They could have done the visions differently. Obviously, it could have helped, but like showing the
Rand
characters.
Rand does return later to talk to her, and he gets a few more that she says. I think she says something about. See, my problem is that it can run together with the book, but doesn't she say something about beautiful, like 3 beautiful women to him?
Yes.
Okay. One of my things is
she said 3 beautiful women and something else, like something and 3 beautiful women, like a crown, or not, maybe not a crown, but like a.
Yeah, I think you're right. I can't remember exactly. Again, it kind of runs together with what she said in the book, which we just read. But I'm really curious, book readers, and I'm trying to be really careful because I don't want to spoil James to anything, but there is a major plot line for men that I'm wondering if they're going to change. And at first, I was convinced, much like we've talked about with other characters, where I'm like, well, I guess they're doing away with that plot line and they're doing something completely different. And I was convinced for a while, but then by the end of this episode and the end of Min's scenes, I kind of came back around to thinking maybe we'll still go the way of the book. So I'm curious to know from people if you can reach out to me without spoiling James, whether or not you think they'll go the way of the book. I will be curious. Yeah, a lot of changes with that character, but I'm glad to see she made it into season 1. I thought she wasn't going to be in season 1 at all, and I was like, oh man, what are they going to do with Min? Or is she going to get written out of the show? Because again, it's like some of the changes are so big that almost anything is on the table. Right? You're like, almost like major characters could be completely omitted. Like, we still haven't seen several major characters. Elias has not shown up in the show so far. Like, there are certain characters that are gone, and it's like, are they going to get introduced later? All the characters who we met in Camelin, like, almost all of them are not in the show so far. So, will we get them? I hope so.
Well, I would say, as somebody who read the first book and like has seen this first season of the show now, I think they kept Min mysterious enough to where I'm not 100% sure on everything that's going to happen with her. So, take that for what you will. But I think it's good to move into episode 8 here. Episode 8 is called The Eye of the World. 3,000 years ago, the Tamerlane seat warns Luz Theron Telamon of the dangers of his plan to imprison the Dark One. In Faldara, Nynaeve tells Lan how to track Moiraine. Thousands of Trollocs attack Faldara. In the Blight, Moiraine gives Rand a Sa-Angreal, an ancient object to enhance his power to defeat the Dark One. At the Eye, Rand sees a vision of him and Egwene starting a family, which the Dark One tells him can come to fruition, trying to tempt him to the shadow. The Dark One cuts Moraine's connection to the One Power. As the Faldara army falls, 5 women, including Nynaeve and Egwene, channel against the attack and destroy the Trollocs. All but Egwene burn out from excessive channeling, who is saved by Nynaeve's sacrifice. Egwene then heals Nynaeve. Perrin uncovers the Horn of Valir, which can summon history's greatest warriors. Padan Fain steals it, revealing he is a dark friend who visited the 2 rivers to find the 5 Ta'Virin. Rand chooses the real Egwene, hitting the Dark One with the Sa-Angreal and fracturing the unbreakable seal he stood upon. Fearing madness, he goes into hiding. Lan finds Moiraine, who tells him that this was not the last battle. In the west, great exotic ships arrive, whose channelers generate powerful waves.
So there are things I like about this episode, but overall, I think this is one of the weakest we've had since the beginning of the show. In my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I was bummed too because it was leading up to, and you know, some of these like we've said, I like 7 a lot. You like 6 a lot. I like 6 as well. But this episode felt like they've tried to cram in so much. It was scattered, and some of the stuff didn't pay off well, some of the choices they made. But one thing that I did like seeing was being 3,000 years ago, seeing Luz Theron Telamon. And, you know, I have to say that it was notable that, like, the overall look of everything looked a lot different, right? 3,000 years ago, the costuming is different, the furniture is different, everything looks pretty different.
It's really cool because in the books, like, you get references to things looking different, but it's a book, so you have to fill in the blanks, right, for a lot of this stuff. And you might be imagining it looking more modern, but you don't have like a concrete proof of that. In the show, they'll like have to make choices about set design and costuming, right? And they make some choices where you're like, holy shit, what show am I watching? When you're first watching it, like, you're like, and then we look out the window and we see fucking flying cars and shit, right? Or flying ships of some kind. And yeah, and it's very futuristic. And this is 3,000 years ago. So we get this idea of like, when they're talking about the Age of Legends and they're talking about before the world was broken, they mean like the technology level, everything was on a whole nother level. And now we've been reduced to this sort of medieval style world, but that is not how it used to be.
Right. Yeah, fascinating stuff, because like that's going to play a part. Obviously, we're going to get more of Luz going forward, and I did think it was cool that the Tamerlane seat was like warning, and it seemed like they were together, right?
Yeah, it did seem that way.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like his plan was going to go poorly, and we got a lot more context for like some stuff that was talked about in the book.
Yeah. It was interesting that they didn't show the opening of the book has not been broached yet in the show.
Yeah, very interesting.
Yeah.
I thought that's what we were getting.
I thought so too. I was like, we're going to get it here. But no, they've saved it. I think we will get it eventually. I think they're building to it, but they want to lay a little groundwork here.
And I didn't remember in the opening scene of the book there being a baby, so that's notable as well, I would say.
I don't know. I don't want to spoil it because, like, if you've only seen the show, I don't want to give any details about it. But yeah, so let's move on. The Dark One. I don't know. He was okay, but like overall, I found him intimidating, but maybe not as intimidating as I would have liked from the Dark One. Like the big bad.
I mean, there were a couple of times that he was like, even when Rand was like getting the better of him, he was like showing a little too much fear, and then like of course in the last minute he does like a little smile, like it was all part of the plan to like test Rand, and this is all going according to his plan. But I would have liked I would have liked to have seen more, like you said, like anciently, epically evil, and like it just seemed like he was like he could have just been one of the Forsaken potentially.
Yeah. I won't talk about anything from the books. I'm having to bite my tongue a lot here. I'll be interested to see what way they go with it in the show. There's potentials to do some of the, like we've talked about, where they kind of bait and switch us with some stuff in the show. There's some potential to do that here, and I wonder if they will.
The Forsaken are talked about, by the way.
They're
like figures that are talked about. So like that's on the table still. If that was the Dark One,
I mean, it better be. The Forsaken are a very important part of this series going forward. So yeah, I think we're going to be seeing some Forsaken in next season. I imagine they're going to start bringing them in. But let's talk about some of the massive changes here, because we actually end the previous episode with Moiraine masking her bond with Lan and taking Rand alone to go to the eye of the world without the rest of the party. And they have set this up. They have set up Moiraine feeling guilty about potentially getting the other ones killed. They've set it up with her having previously masked Lan's bond so that so we understand how that works. They've set it up in certain ways, but I still don't like it. It still feels like a dumb idea. Like it would be a very foolish thing for Moiraine to do, and it feels foolish in the show. It ends up being pretty foolish, and sure enough, it works out. But that's kind of like magic plot armor reasons. The her going in kind of half cocked without even her warder, which is like a fundamental betrayal of their relationship, in my opinion. Like, you don't do that to your warder. Like, I don't know. And like, you could argue like she thought she was going to die, so she was trying to like have Lan not be there and get killed as well or something. But like, I don't know, man.
This is, regardless of that, like the warder bond stuff, she has said multiple times she doesn't care if the others die as long as the Dark One is taken care of. So why would she then out of nowhere be like, you know what, let's save these people?
I don't know. I think the most egregious one is Lan, because they're literally like bonded warriors who have been fighting against the Dark One for years, and everything they do is about this battle. She thinks this is the final battle that I'm about to go take Rand to, and she fights as a unit with him. And for her to say, you know what, in this moment, I'm going to spare him against his will, I just feel, it feels like a character betrayal to me. I just don't see Moiraine doing that to Lan in the book, and not in this way. And then even the way that he's able to get there is so flimsy. Nynaeve is just like, there's a tell, and he's like, tell it to me. And then like we see him later just like going through the blight, you know, just like magically following her, basically, because we're never told what it is. We don't ever see him like looking at the ground as if he's actually tracking somebody. He just can magically follow Moiraine now. So
well, and like this is something that I guess we should address here, is like the show has kind of been setting up this idea that they might still end up going with overall, and maybe the books end up this way, I don't know, but it seems to me like all of these characters are so important that they may all be combined, the dragon plus whatever abilities
the
come
many-headed dragon, that concept gets said at one point in this episode.
Yeah,
right? And
so it's like, if this is the case, having these characters stay back after all this time of setting it up to be different than the novel where it is Rand-centric, all these characters are important, but then in the final battle, the final scene, it's just going to be Rand and Moiraine. It kind of defeats the purpose of having it been so... like setting up these other characters is just as important when like ultimately the final battle that's being fought is like the battle at Fal Dara is a B story in a sense, while the A story has Moiraine and Rand and like the rest of the characters get left behind. I just feel like that was like being set up all along and to leave them behind. I know that they wouldn't have had a ton to do when it came to fighting the Dark One when they got there.
And one of the reasons, and it's kind of a book spoiler, but I think we need to say it. There are two characters at the Eye of the World that are not in the show, and that is Bothamel and Agonor, who are two of the Forsaken. And a lot of like doing battle with them is I kind of think what a lot of the like party has to do, and by cutting them out of the Eye of the World, in addition to the Green Man, by the way, who we just we just mentioned how similar the Eye of the World, you know, was in with its use of the Green Man as to the Green Knight, and in how we thought maybe Robert Jordan was actually making a reference to that poem. And then we get this moment in the show, and there's no Green Man, and I was a little bit disappointed in that. And the whole Eye of the World in general, like I like that I could actually see it. In the book, it gets very surreal. But even so, like, I don't know. I was a little underwhelmed with the way it played out.
Oh, man. The battle that goes down, the fact that he just shoots sparks one time at him and channels, like, one time and, like, hits him with it. And, like, I get that it was a powerful hit, but, like, it was very underwhelming.
Yeah. It was all more, like, psychological. He has this vision with Egwene, and he has to, like, resist it. And, like, that's okay for me, but, like, I would have liked to see, include one other of the Forsaken or something and have them doing battle with Nynaeve and Lan, and like have some of the people there fighting. And maybe if you need to leave behind Perrin or somebody who, you know, could have been left behind. I don't know. There's a way to do it that isn't ultimately what we got. And then even Perrin, like I was like, okay, so they're going to make him stay behind and not participate in the battle, but he's like, what's another way I can be useful? And apparently that's just to go help out these guys get the horn out of the fucking ground, because they weren't going to be able to do it on their own. I don't know. He doesn't seem to do much there. He spots Padan Fain, chases him through the halls with no weapon. He looks at the axe but leaves it, and then he goes just like with no weapon to find him, doesn't find him, and then like circles back around, and by the time he gets back, Padan Fain has killed Loial and has killed like a bunch of these other guys.
I don't know that we got confirmation that Loial's dead.
Yeah, and that's true for several of the characters. Like we see Algomar take a spear and looks like he's dead. Maybe he won't end up being.
He should be dead.
I don't know.
Algomar should be dead as far as that injury is concerned. But like we saw like an off-screen stab of Loial.
Yeah.
Like we haven't seen a ton.
It looked like a pretty. I think right when he walks up, he gives the killing blow. I thought. But maybe not. I don't know. I'd have to watch it again. But like ultimately, I was shocked because I was like, maybe they're killing Loial off here, which is a big change. And then Perrin again is just like he just kind of does nothing. He's faced with Padan Fain and ends up like doing and saying nothing. And in a couple of mil draw, and they leave. Now I will say, I'd like the change in having Padan Fain actually do something here and be a villain and not just be caught trying to scale the walls by some guards, and then like his entire plan is shown. Now Padan Fain goes on to do more in the books, but like he's very underwhelming at the end of book 1. He's not really a big threat, whereas here he is. And I actually think that's a fairly smart change. I don't know. Perrin's whole plotline is such a mess, and he doesn't ever get to do anything cool. All of our other characters have showcase moments, right? Nynaeve and Egwene go out and they form this channel circling group with Amalisa, who ends up drawing too much of the power, but she kills this like massive army of Trollocs in a huge display of the power, which I did not think we were going to get in season 1. And then, but like you see 2 women who are weaker in the power get burnt out, and I noticed that their like little streams were dimmer when she was drawing on it. So
well, they had less like almost like coils going into them.
So that was cool. Like they're doing a lot of interesting stuff here. I think overall it looked pretty good. It does. Sometimes the one power gets a little bit one-notey for me. In the books, I'm always amazed with the ways in which they are able to achieve different effects with the one power. And in the show, it felt like it's a lot of just like bursty light and swirlies that lead to a boom. And maybe you see some lightning, and that's like mostly what you get. There's a lot of cool stuff that happens in the books, but maybe they're saving it. Maybe we'll get some of it in later seasons. So
I was gonna say, I hope that we see more thing. I always assumed that like you can, because like we saw Egwene like shoot little bursts of fire and stuff. Like I need to see more of that, more elemental bending and like whatever.
You can do so much with the one power. It's pretty wild, and we haven't seen hardly any of it in the show.
Yeah, so we got to get more of that. I was really worried they were going to kill Nynaeve for a second. She burned out.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, I don't know how you can have the show and still do that, but they and again, like I said, like, they do such big changes that almost anything is on the table to a certain point, so you're like, ugh.
You got to be careful with doing, like, faking character deaths, though, like, too many times.
At a certain point, you'll become the boy who cried wolf, right?
Yeah, you got to be careful with doing that stuff for sure. So, I'd like to see them not bait and switch that stuff too many more times. But overall, I mean, the display, like you said, was a massive display of this like lightning and stuff. And Egwene brings Nynaeve back with healing of some kind.
Yeah, it seems like it's Egwene. It wasn't clear to me, but I don't know who else it would have been. So it must have been Egwene.
Right. Rand, maybe. I don't know. But
yeah, I don't know. It didn't look like she was like. It looked like she was almost surprised, but maybe that's just because she doesn't control her own power yet. One thing I wanted to mention: there was a moment where they're riding out to the gates to man the gap, and they're on this massive wall, and the Trollocs are attacking, and we're riding our horses at the wall, and I was like, if they fucking ride through this wall, get on the other side, and fight them in front of the gates again, I'm going to, like, lose my shit at television. I was going to be so mad because I have PTSD from season 8 of fucking Game of Thrones with this stupid tactics that were on display, and I was so glad that they fucking went up into the wall, got crossbows, and rained down arrows on the sieging Trollocs. Because, like, I cannot deal with another like stupid charge out in front of your protection. So dumb. And I honestly thought we were gonna get it. I was like, they're fucking doing it again. I was so convinced. I think I just had PTSD of a kind from that. Luckily, that's not what happened.
Oh, I meant to mention before, Padan Fain gets away with the Horn of Valyr,
he does.
Which doesn't happen in the book. They have the horn. They're leaving, like Moiraine is leaving with the horn in the book, towards the other coast, I believe.
Yeah. I think you're right. I wish I could remember for sure, but I think you're right.
I got to talk more about this Rand Dark One situation, because like I found it underwhelming too, because it's not even like Rand touches this amazing piece of the power, which like in the book it's very clear he touches the power and it's this like unbelievable feat. He does all this crazy shit. He like shows up in the gap and like
he creates like an people, earthquake. I didn't even need to see.
Yeah, I didn't need to see all of that, but I needed the display to be like more impressive than just like him hitting with like one blast or whatever. And the other thing is he doesn't do it on his own. He does it using a sa'angreal, which is like not as impressive.
So we have no real hint of like how powerful Rand is or isn't. Now I will say in the book he also is using the power of the Eye of the World, because in the Eye of the World is actually like a well of like liquid one power source. Somehow that he's
of the male side, like untainted male.
It's just like source. This reservoir of power, and that's not in like we don't get any of that in the show. Instead, we get the sa'angreal, which I will say isn't a real thing in the book, and this in the way it's designed is very like a specifically from the book how it looks in the book. So, that all...
We saw, I mean, Moiraine already used one in the first book.
Yeah.
I remember her
She
using
uses a different one, I think, though, not this one, I think. Because I think this one only works for men, I'm pretty sure. And she has it and gives it to him. She uses
it, I think, to heal Tam, I believe.
Yeah, she uses a sa'angreal, but I think they're... I could be wrong about this, but I think they're specifically tied to the half of the source. So, like, this wouldn't be of any use to her. It has to be a male user, I think. But they may change that for the show. I don't know. One thing I wanted to note for book readers is there is a moment where Padan Fain gets admittance into the fortress by saying the words, "The Kingfisher flashes above the pond." And then they're like, "How did you know that?" And like it's like a password, and they let him in. And I just think that's a cool book reference for people. It's not something that's ever going to appear in the show, I don't think, because how really could it? But I don't know. It's not too much of a spoiler, so I guess I'll just explain it a little bit. In the book, when we get more sword play later on in the series, which we haven't gotten a ton of actually in the first book, Robert Jordan loves to describe fighting styles in this way. So he'll say something like, "This character then performed the Kingfisher flashes above the pond," and he countered with a heron swoops in from the, like, it's very like metaphorical, and you're left to sort of decide what that looks like for you. And some people love it, some people absolutely hate it. But he loves the way, like, this is one of the ways in which he describes like epic duels. So I just thought it was funny that this was a very particular phrase. I was like, that's got to be an exact quote from the book for one of these, and he just says it to get admittance into the fortress.
It's super funny. I'm looking forward to getting more. Like, I can't wait to read more, which we'll address here in a second. But last thing we have to talk about in this episode, Moiraine gets stilled.
Yeah. Well, yeah, maybe.
as far as we know,
right? Yeah. She can't touch the source, she says at the end here. Now, didn't at the end of the book she was like having trouble, like,
I don't think
regaining some of her power? She was like super tapped out or something.
Maybe, yeah, that could be the case. But she, like I said, I remember specifically her using her powers like right at the end. Like, she's like using her powers to like eavesdrop. That's the last thing we get in the book.
That would be a pretty big change. It would be almost akin to, like, remember in the Old Guard? This would be a... There's a thing that happens in the Old Guard that is a massive change from the comic to the show, to the movie that we watched. And to me, it would be kind of akin to that. And it would be a big change. And it would be pretty dramatic into what happens with Moiraine going forward if she is sort of stilled here.
Yeah, there's no way she's done.
It could be that he like shielded her in a way that over time she might be able to regain and might heal from it. They might go that route. She might be stilled here. It's definitely possible. Like I said, almost anything is on the table with the show because they have changed so many things. I did think it was foolish of her to let Rand go by himself at the end. Not something that really happens in the book. We do hear him talk about wanting to like go off, but the idea of him just walking out into the Blight on his own from the eye of the world, okay.
Yeah, not a great idea.
Yeah. Totally by himself, doesn't really even know how to control his own power or anything, and he's just going to go walk out into the Blight on his own. Yeah, not a good idea. And then Lan shows up at the end, and like that was the thing. I'm like, why did we do any of this? All it did was make Lan have nothing to do for the entire episode other than wander through the Blight and then show up after everything's over.
Right. Yeah. The ships at the end were cool and weird and unexpected.
What'd you think of that group?
Yeah, I mean, like, cool, like, sort of like teaser for the next season for things. I have no idea what that is. Obviously, no context at all.
And I won't reveal. You know, obviously, I have my thoughts about who that is, but I do think they're moving some of that up. Although I don't really remember. Maybe they do show up in book 2. I'm not actually sure. But they are an important faction going forward that plays a big role.
Well, it's cool. I mean, my reading of it is like people from outside of this continent that we've seen maps of and stuff. And also they're like channeling and they're creating this giant wave. So clearly they're going to be a threat towards this coast and these people and all that kind of stuff. They seemed like invaders. Like they seemed like they had ships and they had battle stuff ready to go. They seemed like they were pretty aggressive. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes.
And we get one last glimpse of Matt. And he is like looking kind of like dark, and he's got his cloak on. He looks dirty, and I think he's back in Tar Valon looking at the tower. That was my read of that. But again, some of the cities look kind of similar, like you said. Maybe he was back in Shadar Logoth? Maybe, I don't know. I think it was Tar Valon though.
Well, I can look again, but I think it was Tar Valon. Yeah.
And anyway, Barney Harris as Matt Cawthon, I thought was one of the standouts from the Two Rivers crew, and it's a real shame to me that he got to do a lot of great stuff early, but Ever since the dagger sort of takes him out, I don't know, he just didn't get to do anything, and it kind of happens in the same way in the book, but now that I know that actor is not returning, it's a real shame, because I would have really liked to see him grow into the character that Matt becomes, which I don't think is a big spoiler to say. Matt tends to be a fan favorite. People love Matt, and mostly for stuff that happens in later books. So, and the way this show goes.
Yeah, like from the book and my early idea of Matt, I was really ready to get invested and really wanted to like him. But then like he's going through a lot, and of course, like I know there's going to be some sort of redemption arc, and like that's something I've been talking about from early on. So I am excited to hear that a lot of people like him. I'm looking forward to really starting to like Matt, because right now he's just like got a lot going on.
Well, speaking of, in our last episode, I think we asked our listeners, like, how would you want us to tackle this thing going forward? Because we talked about some of the struggles with it. And Chris reached out on our Discord and commented about it, responding to that. And he pointed out that like a lot of the major plot of book 2 has not been approached yet. There are certain things that were pulled, and there are certain things from book 3 that were pulled in, but most of the plot of book 2 hasn't occurred yet. So he said, like, why not just cover book 2 when season 2 comes out and do the same kind of thing, and then like later on you can continue to make decisions about if we need to cover more than one book at a time. And I think that's a very solid suggestion, and I think we should definitely consider that when season 2 comes out. Maybe we just read book 2.
Yeah.
And roll with it.
I mean, like I don't think I'd be opposed to setting aside like a month to cover, or maybe a little more than a month each year to cover Wheel of Time, but we'll have to see, because it depends on how quickly the seasons come out and everything like that.
Yeah, how is it going to come out next year? That's an open question. I don't know.
I think I would like to cover it, whether we continue reading on, like whether I continue reading on or not. Like I still would like to cover it in some way. I don't think for now I'm planning on like continuing into book 2 now.
Yeah, I think read Kingkiller. Not Kingkiller, sorry. Read The Way of Kings. Keep reading Stormlight, and hold off on Wheel of Time for now, so that if we want to do book 2, you can keep that reaction. But man, we're here at the end, which means we need to make our ultimate decision on what the better version of this thing is for season 1 and book 1, I guess. Like with that sort of lens on it, what the best version of this of Wheel of Time is so far.
Yeah, it's easy for me. It's definitely the show in this case. I'm just kidding. No.
Okay.
So for me, seriously, no question, it's the book.
Really?
The book was bringing back, like, although familiar, and we've addressed it many, many times about it's very familiar because of Lord of the Rings, and it's, I think it's different enough, but early on it's very Lord of the Rings. But it took me on an adventure that I was looking for. I really wanted a story like this. I'd been waiting to read Wheel of Time, and like the book just like had what I was looking for. Whereas the show was very mixed for me. Like when I was finished with the show, I thought that I would have walked away saying like, okay, the show is great. I think it's, I was expecting really, really high level, and it didn't hit that. It's pretty good. I'm excited to see more, but I was really mixed. Some of the decision making doesn't make sense, and it worries me about the fate overall of the show. This last season 1, got me invested and excited for season 2. I can't wait for season 2, but the thing that I'm dying for, like I would really like to continue reading the book. So that's where I'm at. I'm gonna give it to the book.
This show, I think when it's good, it is maybe even better than I thought we were gonna get. Like when it's really hitting, I am really liking it. I'm like, yes, they get it. They're killing it. But then the lows are so low. The mangling of Perrin's entire plot line, like. There's just so many things, little things throughout and big things that makes me have misgivings. And ultimately it's like, if they can stick to what's working and lean into that and develop that for season 2 and beyond, the show's going to be a hit. And it could do something similar to what, in my opinion, Expanse does on Amazon. And that's it. The first season is okay. And it really takes off from there. And especially in latter half of 2 and into 3, it like takes off and goes to a whole nother level. I would love to see something like that happen with this show.
One thing that does bother me a little bit is because they started season 2 before season 1 came out, I don't know how much they'll be able to react to the fans' like sort of wants and needs. And so that definitely worries me a little bit. But I just hope that they are able to like pivot and react to some things and start trying to move things in the right direction.
And you can't cater too much to what the fans are saying, but you should still be aware of some of the like critical, like it's still good the idea to like react to like critical response and like what are people liking about the show? Like, there's nothing wrong with looking at what is hitting with audiences and going, yeah, maybe I should do more of that. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Yes. You don't want to become a slave to that, but you know what I mean? I think it's still worth keeping an eye on.
There's a couple egregious things, but like most of the other stuff is just little stuff and tweaking and figuring out what works for you and the audience. And I think they'll be able to find that balance as long as they're pouring all the resources they can into it and really, we have some people who are really invested in getting the story right.
So all of that was my sort of building up to making my decision here, and I'm going to give it to the book. I think Teenage Luke would never forgive me if I got to release a podcast episode talking about Wheel of Time and I don't give it to the book here. It was such an important book for me growing up. And
you knew what podcasts were as a teenager?
Yeah, it's amazing. I had the foresight. One day I would be a podcaster, I guess. Right. Speaking of podcasting, thank you all for listening so much. It sounds like the book takes it here, but we will be back hopefully for season 2. If it lines up, and if you want to hear that from us, let us know, because the more excitement and interest there is, the more likely we are to return. And hopefully you got something out of our coverage that maybe other people aren't doing. And we appreciate the time you spent with us. And if you appreciated it from us, let us know in the form of a rating and review, whatever app you listened on. If you're on Spotify, you now have the ability to leave a star rating on the app. I think it's been rolled out all over now, so definitely check that, and we'd love to get 5 stars. I think we have to have like at least 10 before it even shows up, so help us get to the point where it'll show up. That would be awesome. We'd appreciate it.
And make sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, all of those at Ink to Film. And check out our Discord. We have the link for it in our Council of Inklings, which is a Facebook group. And if you wanted to get it another way, you could just message us on any of those social media platforms.
And if you would like to support this podcast financially, which we would be very happy for you to do, we would love to have you over on Patreon. We are releasing a Q&A episode this month, where we are going to be reacting to some questions that we got on that said Discord earlier, also on Patreon. We're talking about some of the outside of adaptations, books and movies that we read this year. We talk a little bit about our lives and some thoughts on fan fiction and the nature of like so bad they're good movies, things like that. It was a lot of cool topics and kind of a mailbag episode. And I had fun recording it, and we will be putting that out very soon. So if you'd like to get that, join us on Patreon. We'd love to have you. Oh, and that's patreon.com/inktofilm.
And thank you to Serious Beat for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, man. So the only other thing we have left this year is our Last Looks episode. That'll be coming up next, where we're going to take a look back at all of the adaptations and books we read and pick our least favorite and favorites. Always a good time. We do this every year. It's a cool way to cap off the year and kind of react to what we've done and make some decisions. And I don't know, I would love to have you join us for that one. And until next time,
keep adapting.